The word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But you know, sometimes why is the key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world, those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to Headroom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go. Those that have followed my interviews and you know my love of stories, the other passion that I have is well, it's within stories. It's embedded within stories, which is the people that are around the corner that I think are there, but I don't know that they're there. I haven't had a chance to meet them. I haven't had a chance to understand the world that they live in, what they see through their eyes and ears, and their experiences. And I have to tell you that today's conversation, I hope that I know you entrust me to be able to pull out the story with our guests, but I hope that I'm able to do that because Nils Pihl, who we have, is just for one, Nils, and I'm going to give your bio in just a second. You are such a thoughtful public speaker. I mean, you had me from, it's like the old line, you had me at hello. And you're talking about things that I don't have expertise in, but it's a world that is fascinating. So we're going to be spending time with Nils Pihl. He's the CEO and founder of Aoki Labs. He's Hong Kong-based entrepreneur, behavioral engineer, and social how do you say that by that? Transhumanist. I like that.
A transhumanist, yeah.
Transhumanist. I like that. Specializing in the intersection of modern technology and human behavior. From your neural interfaces to behavioral analytics at scale, Nils is a serial entrepreneur and thought leader at the intersection of technology and memetics, using a unique combination of meme theory, game theory, and behavioral psychology. And Nils crafts memorable narratives that drive and modify user behavior. He's been enlisted by companies like Weibo, Apple, and the World Bank to foster and spread sustainable, scalable, and desirable user behavior, and was part of the first intracortical neural interface project that proved sensor motor plasticity in primates. His thoughts on memetics and UI and UX design have been translated into several languages, cited in academic papers, and helped shape brands and communities with hundreds of millions of users. Nils, this really was, I will tell you, obviously you're in Hong Kong and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee in the US. So we have quite a time span of time here between us, but even taking my kids to school today and, you know, they're 6th and 4th grade and, you know, they wanted to know who I was interviewing. Well, that was a dangerous question because I started walking through everything that I had learned from just watching you about spatial computing. So we're going to dive into all of that. Because the world that you are living in and that you are creeping up on, so many of us have no idea, right? It's like I felt like I was looking into the future. I want to go backwards. Talk with me about what it was like when you were a kid. Tell me about the kitchen table discussions. I want to understand sort of the mind of you, the background of you that would give you the confidence to be an explorer into a very unknown world.
Both of my parents were software entrepreneurs growing up. They had a business together in the late 80s and 90s. I was born in 86. They made business software on the Macintosh and were early adopters of computers and had the great foresight of putting a computer in my room when I believe I was 5 years old. So I've had a computer in my room since I was 5 years old. But having a computer at 5 back in the early 90s is a little bit different from having a computer at 5 now, because we didn't have YouTube back then. There was much less documentation about how to use the computer. So of course it was almost like an oral tradition, you know, passed on from father to son, how to use the computer. And eventually, when I was a bit older, you know, in my early teens, I made it onto the internet. And this was the internet, you know, before our grandparents got Facebook accounts. It was a very different internet because back then, computer adoption wasn't as high and internet adoption was even lower, meaning that the people that had made it onto the internet were kind of invariably weird. there were a lot of ambitious, pioneering people on the internet that had the wits and the grit to teach themselves how to get onto this frontier online. And one kitchen table discussion that I've always remembered that kind of ties into this was I brought my first internet connected laptop with me down to the kitchen table once because I wanted to continue a conversation over chat. In fact, I wanted to continue several conversations over chat, which was something I had been, kind of meditating on. Like, how weird is it that maybe for the first time in human history, we can have several conversations going all at once, right? We don't stop to think about it, but before chat rooms, before written communication, how would we have had 4 different conversations going all at once? What would that
We
even
wouldn't.
mean, right? Um, so I was kind of in this, pensive mood about like how cool it is, how transhuman it is to be able to have multiple conversations at the same time. I bring the laptop with me to the kitchen table, of course, not popular, right? And my mom asked, don't you want to be social at the table? And I snapped something like, you don't understand how social I'm being right now. I'm having 4 conversations at the same time, right? I don't want to unplug from the internet. I don't want to leave the metaverse. Because I remember feeling, ironically, in the early 2000s, that like, this is the metaverse. This is the ground floor of the metaverse. I just read Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson and seeing this uh, that was written in the early 90s, and in the early 2000s, so much of it had already come true. And I felt like, wow, this is the ground floor of the metaverse. I have a digital identity. My digital username feels more real to me than my real name. I'm better at English than Swedish because I spent all this time online. And I, yeah, I'd like to say I grew up on the internet. A lot of my dinner table conversations
Through
were
chat.
about uh, what a radical change the internet was, and I was lucky to have thoughtful parents that were happy to engage in those conversations and feed into that privilege of making sure I had computers, etc. So
So,
very thankful for that upbringing.
Nils, so what was the impact socially for you? Because, I mean, I think it's fair to say you were ahead of your time. Now, I am a decade older than you, and the only thing I remember the next door neighbor, they got like the Apple IIe, right? I remember lining up in early elementary in the library so we could all see the Oregon Trail game. I mean, that was so exciting, right? um, but there was this notion that sort of the kids that went into learning DOS or whatever, we didn't even know what these things were, that there was a social contract that they were either breaking or that they were deciding would take them down a very different path than whatever we thought normal was. And if you're already sort of having this sort of cocktail hour on planet Earth at the kitchen table with 4 different discussions with people that are not in your kitchen, I would think that you were putting yourself in what could have been potentially a lonely social experience from a physical realm. What was the impact on you socially? Did you have like-minded friends? Were people already sort of advancing in that world and you found sort of your niche? Or did you
So
care?
when I say I grew up online, what I mean is most of my friends were online. Like I had plenty of friends. I look back very, very fondly at my childhood and my teenage years in particular, and the amazing people that I knew online. Like those were amazing years spent in the metaverse. I'm very thankful. But it was a very different kind of social from the kind of social that my parents had had. And I think actually the meaning of being social has changed in a couple of fundamental ways over the last few decades, more than once. Um, in fact, if I may go on a bit of a rant here, uh,
Please.
I think that what it means to be human in a social context has changed very, very dramatically a few times in human history, right? So if we go all the way back to when we used to have oral traditions, before we had writing, it's a very interesting mode of consciousness to be in when you don't have writing, when information cannot be persisted, when all the information that our tribe is going to be retained is going to be retained through active conversation. If the last speaker that knows something about something dies, that information is lost forever in an oral tradition. So in an oral tradition, you have to engineer a healthy tribe around keeping information alive through conversation. Very different headspace from the headspace we're in, right? That must have been a radically different human experience to be a part of that oral computer keeping information alive. And then we invented writing. And writing, again, complete game changer, at least for some humans early on, of what it meant to be a human. And by now, it's changed everyone's consciousness. Because with writing, all of a sudden, ideas can survive outside of conversations and can be retrieved at a later time. And this is such a radical shift in the history of the universe, right? That information could all of a sudden be persisted and propagated from peer to peer while taking pauses, being persisted in a library somewhere. Super, super radical change. Maybe the most radical thing that has happened in the universe so far, or memes becoming encoded as persistent information. And this broke our oral traditions. It wasn't economically efficient to have oral traditions anymore. We started writing things down and it changed our societies. But writing was still costly and reading was still difficult. And move forward a few thousand years and we invent the printing press. And the printing press is another radical change to what it means to be human, because all of a sudden information can be mass produced and mass propagated, and ideas can travel through civilization in ways just unimaginable to the humans that came before. And then again, there are many centuries of kind of status quo there until we invent the radio and the telephone. And now, for the first time ever, we can have real-time communication with someone that's not physically present with us. What a radical change that is also. To be able to feel togetherness as a mode of consciousness with someone that's not physically present with you was invented at the time of the telephone and the radio. That was the first time we could have a social experience at a distance. Wow, right? That's a pretty radical shift. And then in our lifetime, that phone became a cell phone, and loneliness became a question of socioeconomic status. From the moment that the cell phone was invented, you've never had to be lonely if you had the social circle around. You could always choose to be speaking to someone, which is kind of nuts. You know, we social turtles that bring our shell with us out into the world. And that happened in our lifetime. And it was actually the radical change to my life, receiving my first cell phone, that first made me think, as an early teenager, I get my first cell phone. Even before the internet, I start thinking about what a radical different dating experience I have from what my parents tell me they had when they were young. Because I can take a walk in the woods and talk to my girlfriend and not feel alone. And my sister can walk home at night and not feel scared because she can call me and feel like, what a radically different human experience. And from the cell phone, shortly thereafter, we get the chat room, which, as I already touched on, the chat room allows us to have conversations with multiple people all at once. Again, a completely new mode of social interaction. That mode of social interaction was invented quietly. We've barely discussed the huge impact it has had on our psychology in our lifetime, just like the cell phone, in our lifetime. And these have completely redefined, I think, even what we intuitively think about as a social experience. Now it's completely natural that you and I can have a conversation across continents and see each other and pick up on each other's body language cues and have a moment of togetherness, hopefully, in a conversation. This is what transhuman is, right? To kind of unpack that word. Transhumanism is this philosophical push that we should try to use technology to expand on what it means to be human. Humanity has not been created yet. We're in the process of creating humanity through our technology and our inventions, such as writing and the printing press and the telephone and the internet, and now also spatial computing and augmented reality, which I think is the next big thing that is going to change how we interact with each other. These define who we are as a people.
Now, you mentioned that the cell phone was so transformational for you. Was there a moment when you look? I think there are different types of people, right? There are you see it in young kids even. There are kids that they just have a natural inclination to go for it or to explore. Some are more reticent just by nature, right? They're more safety conscious. They're not going to be the one that sort of jumps into the lake off of a rock ledge, kind of a thing, right? And others are going to just run off that. When did you know that one, you could do it; two, it was okay; three, you'd be supported; and four, when you failed, it wasn't a big deal to start exploring? Was it just were there building blocks along the way? Was it when you knew that you could bring the chat room per se to the kitchen table and you could sort of bend the reality in a way that was inclusive of what your parents already instilled in you because of what they leaned into professionally and personally, what they liked and gravitated to? But how did you know, or did you know that you wanted to be that way? Like, I see kids on the soccer field, they naturally want to be a captain. They want to be one that takes the last shot, kind of a thing. And I see you in that. You don't have to say that. And as we get into all the things that you're doing now professionally, I'm so curious as to that because I see so many young people when I speak at schools, they're trying to understand the entrepreneurial mindset, right? They're trying to understand their own story and potentially what character they could play if they fully believed in their capabilities.
I didn't understand that I was entrepreneurial until many years after I had started exhibiting signs of being an entrepreneur. Um, Looking back at my life, I can see now that my entrepreneurial journey started a lot earlier than it did emotionally for me. The the emotional aha moment of having the path of entrepreneurship open to me was in my early 20s. I had a older, just slightly older, but old enough that it was exciting to me at 21, older uh, lover and mentor who had taken me under her wing to teach me about business. And she really believed in me in a way that my parents had believed in me before, but I couldn't take my parents seriously when they said these things because they're my parents,
Yeah,
like
every parent
of
says it.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but having this woman believe in me and give me some mentorship and show me that I could actually do these things and that it's okay to be ambitious, that it's cool to be ambitious, which is something that Swedish people struggle with. We have this cultural notion called jantelagen, that it's kind of taboo to be ambitious, actually. Um, but this woman
I
was
know
not
that taboo
Swedish.
quite well.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been many times to Sweden. I'll be there in 2 weeks.
It's something I struggle with to this day, that ambition scares me every now and then. Like it's a cultural faux pas to be ambitious.
Or to
So
be
I'm
and to
very
be
thankful
public,
to
right?
this.
To be public with
Yes.
your like a declaration.
Yes, yes. I sometimes joke that I'm a refugee from the Swedish jantelagen. Uh, I have fled to the much more ambitious East Asia, where you can dream big and build fast. So yeah, the wake up moment for me was in my early 20s when this woman encouraged me and mentored me and said, you can do these things and you should try to be the best, not just be good. You should try to be the best. And that was a very radical notion to me at the time. Like, oh, is that a thing that you can set out to try? Is that okay? Is it okay to try and fail? And like, yes, it's okay to try and fail, but there you want to play the biggest game you can find. And I've been doing that ever since. I'm trying to play the biggest game I can find, and I think the biggest game in the universe is the universe of memetics. How information propagates from one point to another, how information becomes culture, and culture becomes prevalent. Uh, One eye-opening realization for me is, 1,000 generations from now, your great 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 offspring will share almost no uh, you know, uh, DNA that will be recognizably yours. But you could, in theory, write a song today that an alien species will perform 10 billion years from now, right? Information can live forever in a way that DNA
It's going to
cannot.
take me that long to write a good song.
Better get started soon.
Right. Okay. I want to sort of take a turn here and start to talk about your work and the area of your expertise. But I want to give it a little bit of a backdrop. So a couple of years ago, I interviewed Deepak Chopra, and that was a mind-bending experience um, from my chair. And there was something that he said that has always stuck with me. And he made this comment that, the younger generation take sort of, well, the younger generation than even you and I, right? Both the ones that we represent, is that they are starting to get annoyed with the physical world because they can manipulate the digital world. They can move a tree, they can move a house, they can change something within these digital landscapes. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you your perspective on that, because there is definitely a generational undertone to a world where I'm explaining to my fourth grader this morning. She's asking me about your work and AI and exactly what is it and how do I experience these things now, when in essence, in her mind, computers are thinking for her. And she said, Daddy, I don't think I like AI. I like to think for myself, which I just thought was just a thoughtful, but yet sort of a bit of a quip from a 9, soon to be 10-year-old on a world that will definitely occupy her experience.
Thinking for yourself is very important and one of the great human drives to sit down and tackle a problem. But we have other drives, of course, hunger and thirst. And one of the drives that I believe humans have is the drive for sensory congruence. Right? What does this mean? Like we actually want, at a physical level, we want all of our senses to agree with each other. It's uncomfortable, quite literally. It's uncomfortable when there's a delay between what we see and what we hear, and when we feel movement in a car but we don't see the movement. These things literally make us car sick and seasick and all of these things. It's important to have sensory congruence, and that need manifests so deeply that it even manifests in our social interactions. We need external sensory congruence. One thing that we need as humans is intersubjectivity. We want to feel that we are experiencing reality the same way that other people are experiencing reality. It is unsettling when you can't make other people see what you see. It's unsettling when you can't make people understand what you understand. I think that Mr. Chopra is right in that people are growing frustrated, but I think that the frustration is not with the physical world. The frustration is the barrier between human beings when we're trying to make each other understood, when we want to understand each other. Language is how we manifest our imagination and our knowledge in the minds of others so that people see the world the way we do. This is what language is. This is what language is for. Uh, One way I like to demonstrate this is like if we were to imagine that we were walking through a forest together and we came across a fallen tree. And I said, hey, look at that beautiful couch. The moment I've described the fallen tree as a beautiful couch, you can now see the sittingness of this tree. That's phenomenal. Language has this ability to reach into another human being's very perception and change the way that reality manifests to this person. This is what language is. It's what it's for. We use language to be computer together. We use language to be able to process information together and to think together. So just as it's very important to be able to think for yourself, we also have a deep human drive to want to think together. And I think that the transhuman future of civilization is us being a lot closer to each other, better capable of communicating with each other. This has always been the historical trend. We increase the bandwidth and capacity of our conversation with the invention of the writing, with the invention of the printing press, with the invention of the telephone and the internet. The meme, language, culture is always improving its own tech stack. And what spatial computing and augmented reality is allowing us to do now is to put digital information in physical space, which in very many cases allows us to communicate much more clearly and effectively with each other. In ways that, again, I believe every time humanity has stood at the precipice of one of these inventions that allow us to communicate with greater bandwidth and greater clarity, we have always stepped through that door. And now we're standing at one of these precipices again, and we will step through this door. We are going to start putting digital information in physical space so that we can think together, not just with each other, but think together about the physical world together with robots and AI. That's the big thing that's happening in the universe right now, I believe, that with the rise of spatial computing and AI at the same time, we are now for the first time inviting computers into our world to join us in what we're doing instead of the escapism of my youth, where we went into the computers and we went into the internet. Now the internet is coming to us.
We classically talk about um, the software adoption curve, right? And sort of breaking that down. If I'm, innovating around some technology, I really want my user group to be able to access that, because the more that they do, then my revenue is going to go up, right? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm saying that because I want to dive into these different areas and the utility of spatial computing. And you have some fantastic examples in some of your public speeches, which are really, really thoughtful. I want to understand first, though, what is it that you think, like, in essence, do we have innately as a species the ability to comprehend what is around the corner? I talked about in the open about how I just personally like that, to know sort of that there's a mystery around the corner. Maybe it's a person, an idea, a story, because I'm searching for that. That's compelling to me, and I'm just curious where we are in our ability. And we hear about like quantum computing, all these different things. In essence, processing speed. But this is not just about processing speed at all. To me, it's about being able to understand and be able to sit, no pun intended, in the notion of that you see a tree that's fallen and you tell me what a beautiful couch. Help me understand where you think we are, like what steps, what do we need to be able to do? How does this impact the way in which we talk to our children, or we teach them in classrooms, like the way in which we look at even information and what it means to be knowledgeable, and to comprehend? Because the Nils Pihls of the world can create these amazing sort of next gen, next species um, products, solutions, experiences. But I'm just so curious about someone in rural America or wherever on planet Earth, that my guess would be that that software adoption curve, in quotes, is going to be pretty steep. Maybe I'm wrong.
So both humans and robots and drones will make use of spatial computing. Spatial computing is the art of helping the devices understand the physical world, uh, so that they can reason about it and even anchor information in it.
The
Now,
language, would you say? In essence, it's like
uh,
the way you said that, it came across as a language for the technology to be able to speak in a world that we share together.
it really is about establishing a shared language. Yes, getting a language for the computer to be able to describe the physical world in such a way that another computer will understand what it says, right? One of the big differences between a computer game and reality is every computer game has a coordinate system somewhere under the hood where you can describe an XYZ coordinate of where that game object is. That's how game engines work. And if we live in a simulation, the real world works like that too. But if we're not living in a simulation, there is no such underlying coordinate system, and there's no absolute truth of where things are. The world is relative. And in our language, when we describe where things are, we're always describing that relative to something. I am in front of this, I am behind that. You have to establish shared frames of reference. And computers don't have a shared frame of reference for the physical world. Sometimes, they can use the GPS, and the GPS can place them, you know, within a few meters of where they are if you're outdoors, but indoors it doesn't work at all. And when you want to play something really, really precisely, like for shared augmented reality, where you see something in AR together, it needs to be placed with centimeters of accuracy, millimeters of accuracy. And computers are not inherently able to do that. So uh, spatial computing will, before you get AR glasses that you wear every day, spatial computing will help, for example, the robots that Elon is building navigate to the grocery store. Spatial computing is this entire discipline of how do we teach machines to understand the physical world. And the way that this will impact us, the way it started to impact us already, I'd like to introduce this term hybrid robotics.
Hybrid robotics.
In search of a better term. We have started augmenting ourselves using technology in very cool transhuman ways that have very meaningfully, using AI, machine learning, and devices, increased our human capacity. For example, with the invention of the smartphone combined with the GPS and the car, now everyone can be an Uber driver. Everyone with a driver's license can be an Uber driver. Before the GPS and the smartphone, that required specialist training, right? Before the invention of the smartphone and the GPS, there was a very limited pool of people in the world at any given moment that could get you from point A to point B. But now anyone with a driver's license can get you from point A to point B. This is because the driver and the phone are acting in symbiosis together in a form of hybrid robotics. There's some AI cognition and human hands and human feet driving the car, right? To some extent, the device is driving. It's telling us where to go. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And we recently made a very simple app that retail staffers can use to leave invisible Post-it notes for each other in the store.
Is this McKenna?
Why would this is not McKenna?
It's not.
This
Okay,
is
so we'll
something
get to
called
McKenna.
Cactus.
Okay.
We'll get to yes, we'll get to McKenna. We released something called Cactus that allowed retail staff to put notes for each other in a physical space, which you can do with McKenna too, but this was tailored for task management. Now, why would you leave a Post-it note for someone? Well, because space is context. Space explains a lot about what needs to be done. If you think of a Post-it note that says, fix this, attached to a bicycle, you now understand what it is you're supposed to fix, right? Attaching information to space adds a lot of information. And being able to assign a precise position to a task in augmented reality means that you can leave an invisible AR note that only other staffers can see, which means you don't have to go find each other. You don't have to walk someone over and explain. You just leave the information where the information needs to be, and the other person will get guided there by the AI and shown. And what we found doing this for the last 7 months with Sweden's second largest retailer is that they get more stuff done every day. But more importantly, some of their cognitively impaired staff are now operating at the same level as their peers.
Explain that.
Because before, the team managers would have to convey all the information of what needs to be done through conversation and through walking over and gesturing and all of these things. And about a fifth of the male population has an IQ of 90 or below. And at an IQ level of 90 or below, you start struggling with multi-part instructions. It starts becoming difficult with multi-part instructions. And what we see now is that the task of transmitting the information about how to complete the task is easier using this technology. So now what our customer tells us is that now we only have to explain it once. Using this tool, we only have to explain it once. The app will guide them to where they need to go. There's a photo that shows things. I can leave a description in the place, which means that the description is right there when they need it. And I think this is another case of hybrid robotics, right? What we are adding to this now is we just developed a very unique wearable that you put around your neck. As a retail staffer, you hang it around your neck. It was inspired by the neck fans that are very popular here in East Asia.
I have one.
It was inspired by these neck fans. In fact, our first version of it, we bought a neck fan and we scooped it out and we put our components inside just to try out the form factor, right? And what this wearable can do is it can stream video for 9 hours straight, so a full shift, and it shows the AI what it is you're doing in the store, so that the AI can help make recommendations about things that need to get fixed. The first proof of concept of this that we built was that we taught the AI to detect empty shelves, but also to annotate precisely in 3D where is this empty shelf and what needs to be refilled. So even if I'm just as a staffer walking down an aisle on my way to do something else, this AI will pick up, oh, here are some things that should get fixed. I'm going to write them down for you. I'm going to put this into the system. In fact, if I know who should fix this, I'm going to go right ahead and allocate this task to that person, right? Now we are solving problems together with the AI. And we think that this system will really, really help the retail workers get a lot more done, feel more satisfaction with their work, feel less frustrated, feel more certainty about what they do. And I believe that there is a path here. The reason I say hybrid robotics instead of robotics, I actually think there's a path that humanity can choose to go down where we work closely together with AI instead of replacing ourselves with robots. Because when we work together with AI intercognitively, we can give these superhuman abilities to every able-bodied person. There's a version of the future where every able-bodied person can make very significant contributions to civilization because they are the hands and legs and companion thinking partner of an AI that doesn't have the ability to move around the world the same way. I think that's as someone who grew up with computers, I think it's really beautiful, the idea that I can carry a computer with me in the world, help that computer understand the world, and that computer helps me understand the world too.
Headroom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest.
Do you ever wake up and you worry that you have too many ideas streaming through your mind? Like, how do you, I mean, you're unafraid. It's like a love affair that you have with the unknown, which I think, you and people like you will help all of us benefit in these fantastic ways. Even in an example about the retail and someone that may be a little bit more challenged, giving them that information says to me that that's going to increase their confidence to be able to engage with people, with customers in the physical space. And that may be a secondary benefit, but wow, what an incredible human experience. So how do you understand, how do you deal with, is it a constant flow of information? How do you discern what is a good idea? What is an idea that you're going to table? Because I think that when we think about the younger generation and entrepreneurs, I mean, look, I grew up, Nils, no one talked about being an entrepreneur, and I'm just 10 years older than you, right? They didn't. Maybe a parent had their own insurance, agency, or they had a hardware store that their grandfather started, whatever it was. You didn't talk about it in that way. Otherwise, you were an inventor. You had to have an idea, and it was about a singular idea that potentially could be worthy of the market. Tell me about your relationship to ideas, your personal relationship.
At a spiritual level, I believe that the imagination is a sense organ. Having meditated a lot, I've noticed, as I think everyone that does mindfulness meditation notices, that we are not the author of our own thoughts. They just appear in consciousness. We don't choose what we think about. Our thoughts just come to us and we can observe them coming, which to me means that empirically, like I experience it. The imagination must be a sense organ. The imagination is a force out there that we can perceive. And I find that very exciting. What I believe spiritually is that, we don't understand where consciousness sits. But I think a good candidate explanation is that consciousness is what it feels like when information moves around. And Richard Dawkins wrote this book in the late 70s called The Selfish Gene that explained the neo-Darwinian perspective on evolution, which means that we've all heard survival of the fittest. The naive interpretation of survival of the fittest is that the strongest individual is the one that will thrive. But what the neo-Darwinian perspective is no, natural selection is best understood, not at the level of the species, not at the level of the tribe, not even at the level of the individual. The battle for survival is at the level of genes themselves. That's where the drama of nature plays out, wrote this scientist, Richard Dawkins. And in this book, he had a chapter where he invented the word meme, which was the counterpart of a gene, but for information. He posed the thought experiment, what if culture was also subject to natural selection? And I think this is a really radical idea. One of the most brilliant ideas that anyone has ever had is that information propagates through natural selection. And the best ideas are the ones that survive. In that, goodness means its ability to survive. Just like survivability of a gene is just how many copies did you make? Information is always trying to spread itself. And I think where we are in the history of the universe right now, spiritually, I believe that information is starting to become self-aware. From the moment that we started speaking to each other, and certainly from the moment that we started writing things down, our culture is now a bigger part of who we are than our biology. I believe this very, very firmly. We are more shaped now by our cultural urges than our biological urges. But of course, we still have our biological urges. We are defined by our culture now. And just as I perceive that I am the center of things, even though my genes may be the center of things, I think it's possible that the drama of memetics and consciousness is happening at many levels that we don't yet perceive. I think it's possible that humanity is conscious. I think it's quite likely that humanity is conscious. And we are the neurons of this big brain that we are building together through our conversations, increasingly real time, increasingly from one to many. We have this new brain hardware like Twitter, like podcasts, where we're putting information and manifesting our knowledge and imagination in the minds of others, and forming this global computer together.
So are we in a collision course of sorts? And maybe that's stronger than I mean to say. I mean, in the developed world, it feels like the pursuit professionally is to achieve a sense of agency. And yet walking down the trail that you're painting for me, right, would be the counter to that. Or maybe it's not. It's that through that collective experience that we share as being sort of these neural networks to the greater sense of humanity, that there's some level of agency that is experienced. Where does agency fit into that calculus?
I think agency is not disappearing, it is moving. Agency is moving into our groups. This has been the trend for a long time. Like as tribes, we could exercise more agency than we could as individuals. We could make bigger decisions, take bigger bets. We could carve more freedoms for ourselves. And we graduated up to nation states, and now we're graduating up to network states and the metaverse, and we are moving agency to larger cultural groups that can make bigger decisions, shape the world more, improve the world in better ways, ruin the world in worse ways. We are becoming more powerful together. And I enjoy being part of a together. I think one of the greatest joys in life is working on hard problems with smart people.
I agree. So then how do we tackle this? And this may be purely an American affliction, which is this notion that we've been sold for generations that do it alone. Be the lone cowboy, or be the astronaut, whatever it is, do it alone, because the one who does it alone reaps all the rewards and the glory publicly, right? But I like the vision that you're painting, and I understand that because I get that sense in my travels around the world, whether I'm actually going somewhere or I'm talking with someone across continents like we are today. That fills me up. I understand that experience that you're describing, but it feels like it would a natural, I don't know where in the sequence, but a natural conversation would be around how do we understand our own personal value, our own contribution? Because just from an American perspective, you add somebody new to a team professionally, there's gonna be a ripple effect around that team, whether it's stated or not, that if Nils comes into this team, now I have to understand as a coworker and colleague, what's the impact on me? Am I going to be viewed differently? What I thought I was valuable for yesterday may change with your inclusion. Do you see that as a part of a larger conversation as we begin to, I think, um, see, to your point, the relationship that's building with the unknown, with technology, with AI, all these sorts of elements that is in its infancy for many of us.
I am certainly pro communion. I am pro village. I believe in my heart of hearts that it's a healthy impulse in humans to want to make villages together, to want to come together to solve problems together. Uh, and I do think that there is a certain American meme and maybe misconception about the role of individualism, even in America's own success. As someone not American, if I can be a little bit incendiary,
No, please.
I'd like to point out that perhaps the root of America's greatness right now is Silicon Valley, but half of the engineers hired into very senior positions in Silicon Valley on any given year were born in China or India, right? And a very high percentage of the founders of the unicorn companies in America are not from America. The greatest asset that America has is that Silicon Valley is a place that draws people from all over the world to want to go there to tackle improving the world together. And it's not the rugged individualists that are making this happen. I think that's an American fantasy and misconception about what's really happening in America. What's really happening in San Francisco is San Francisco has the power to attract uh, people like me and others from all over the world to go there to attempt to build things together. And people seek out that togetherness and that community. And that's why they go there. They weren't grown there, they went there.
And so now we're talking narrative, right? I mean, that's what's compelling. I would think that if I'm sitting in your chair, you see information propagated throughout news agencies around the world. And I would imagine that you've sort of shake your head back and forth like they don't understand or they don't that there's this fear mongering around technology that wants to take. We see that here in the US quite a bit. That in essence, it's not what it's, what it's not what we think that it is. But to your point, I mean, when, the notion of we live in a very small world. This is a global economy. These things are happening. And I really want to use that as a bit of a runway for you to talk a little bit about, because you're going to do it much more poetically and I think with much more meaning and impact. If you talk a little bit about this notion that we will have 100 billion decision makers in a world of 10 billion humans. If there's been something that I have watched or read recently that has really just stuck with me, it was that discussion that you had. I think it was like the WoW conference or something like that. Um, could you speak a little bit to that and how we should understand what truth versus reality, and if that's even the thing that we should be looking at?
So one of the major activities of civilization is resource allocation, right? We decide where our resources are going to be spent. Where are we sending our food? Where are we sending our fuel? Where are we sending our money? Where are we sending our labor? It's one of civilization's many preoccupations, right? Resource allocation. And uh, our most impactful decisions uh, outside of how can we love each other better is how can we best use our resources. A lot of our most important decision making is about how can we use our resources. And one of the interesting trends, as we are inviting computers to do more and more work with us and to join us in the physical world as drones and robots and embodied AI, is we are going to see more and more decisions being made, decisions about resource allocation being made by non-human participants, being made by agentic AIs that can make decisions based on an agenda that they have been given, meaning they will be making decisions on our behalf often, but also on behalf of themselves to be able to optimize for the outcome that they're supposed to optimize for. I lived in Beijing for 7 years. And in Beijing, there are more cars on the road than there are people in Los Angeles.
That's
And
unbelievable.
oh,
I mean,
let me drop some stats on you. But yeah, okay.
please,
So
no, this is
so,
when I want you to drop some stats, because these are the things I was trying to tell my kids in the car today, just to give them scale up,
all right, let's go into scale space.
Okay.
There are more cars on the road in Beijing than there are people in Los Angeles. And Beijingers have one of the longest commutes in the world, on average 2 hours. A quick back of the napkin calculation will show that somewhere on the order of the time it took to build the pyramids is lost in Beijing traffic every week.
Every week.
This is this every week, because you have 20 million people, more actually, in Beijing. So you take 20 million people losing an hour or two every day. It turns out that millions of hours is a very long time. Millions of hours is a very long time. So of course, there's a great economic incentive to make traffic move faster, and for us to waste less time being stuck in traffic. And this economic incentive makes us invent self-driving cars. Great. So now we got some of that time back and we can sit with our laptop. Fantastic. But we are still getting stuck in traffic jams because the self-driving cars can't talk to each other. But if they could talk to each other and they could understand physical space together, then they could start negotiating lane merges and things like this together. And all of a sudden, we can imagine an emerging traffic pattern where cars coordinate with each other, and we don't need red lights and things like this anymore. Okay, now we've all of a sudden freed up the pyramids worth of human productivity just in Beijing every week. Amazing. A lot can happen when you can teach the machines to negotiate with each other and to understand physical space together so that they can solve problems like traffic together. How would that work? Well, you would give your car a little bit of a budget and a mandate and explain, I'm cool with you spending this much fuel, this much time, this much money. These are my rider preferences. Get me where I need to go. And these cars will be able to,
right? Like notification settings, literally that easy. Yeah.
And at the scale of modern Asian cities, something like this makes a lot of sense. Like imagining getting millions of hours of human productivity back every day is, of course, a huge incentive. But Beijing is not even that big a city. In the greatest city in the West, New York, there are over 900 buildings taller than 100 meters. In Hong Kong, where I live, there are over 4,000. Hong Kong is the densest city in the world.
And isn't it smaller in space than Los Angeles?
Oh, it's crazier than that. Hong Kong is very, very small, but Hong Kong is wall to wall with the city of Shenzhen, which is wall to wall with the city of Guangzhou. And if you zoom out and you look at Hong Kong and Shenzhen and Guangzhou and the surrounding cities, that is one contiguous urban area.
The Greater Bay Area,
contiguous, right? The Greater Bay Area. And the Greater Bay Area is only 2/3 the area of the Greater Los Angeles area, right? So it's not that Hong Kong is smaller than Greater Los Angeles. No, no, no. The Greater Bay Area is smaller than Greater Los Angeles. And in that area, today are 87 million people at the latest count. And they estimate that by 87 million.
And isn't the population of Los Angeles less than 4 million?
100 million. Yeah, so like this is many, many times bigger. So many times bigger.
We got less than 4 million in Los Angeles. And we look at
but in Greater Los Angeles, it's more fair to say like 15.
15. Okay, when we're doing the
Greater Los Angeles.
Yeah. So not within just the city.
To make an apples to apples comparison, Hong Kong is several times bigger. Like I do want to give Los Angeles its due. It is a big place, but it's not at the same level of scale as the big Asian cities that are now over 50 million for for similar areas. And the greater Hong Kong area, the Greater Bay, will surpass 100 million very soon.
It's there's such staggering numbers. It's hard to. It's like the tree. It's like my brain is trying to see the couch that you see with a fallen tree. You know, it makes me think about, this will date me a little bit, but it's a classic movie, but Dead Poet Society, when Robin Williams decides to stand on the desk just to give the kids the notion that perspective, right? When we change that, we change the view that we have, we can see a completely different world. And they're just sort of awestruck that this teacher would do something that breaks a social norm and expectation. Um, do you feel like, in some sense, and maybe with a bit of a wink and a smile, that to be in the world that you are as an explorer and those your contemporaries, that you have to be a bit of a rule breaker?
I think what I will say for individualism, right, is if you find yourself in a leadership vacuum, you're it, right? If you ever find yourself wishing there was more leadership around you, that's your sign that you should go out and be a leader and show your brothers and sisters the way. Um, Civilization was made by humans, just like you and me, from top to bottom. It's all made by just people trying their best. And you can be a person that can try your best, and you can be a part of shaping civilization. People just like you do it every day. You just have to show up and do that work. I don't know if that's rule breaking as much as it is village building. You just have to show up for the work.
I love that notion of just showing up for the work. Can we plug in the way in which you think and the way in which your industry writ large is sort of approaching all of sort of what a new world could look like? How should I understand the role of spatial computing at a very base level in a sustainability space or in a sustainability effort? How can we understand saving our world, saving our resources in a world where we have a lot more information that allows us to communicate potentially a lot more efficiently, get us, give us back our time, to your point around the commute? Is there a discussion to be had in what you're doing in a world that hopefully is trying to, especially in the Nordics and in Sweden, where they talk about sustainability at the coffee shop, at the gym? Help me understand the role that your world plays in sustainability, or could.
An amazing thing about Hong Kong is how green it is. If you look at a map, you'll be surprised to see that 70-80% of the land of Hong Kong is green jungle and mountains and beaches. The majority of the land area is protected nature in Hong Kong, which is weird, seeing how high the population density is. It's why there are so many tall buildings in Hong Kong, because they don't spread out and they leave nature. That means that almost anywhere I go in Hong Kong, I can hop in a cab and be out in nature 5-10 minutes later. That's something that is hard to imagine, I think, from the car-based American perspective, that you can have 1 million people as your neighbors and still have jungle and forest and beaches just around the corner, especially for someone living in Silicon Valley, where it's just endless single family homes, right? A suburban desert, in my opinion. You have to go very far to get some nature. Here, nature is walking distance. If I take I live in a very, very, very dense part of town, and if I took a half-hour walk from here, I would see wild monkeys. So I think a big part of sustainability is building taller cities, I believe. And I think we can be better stewards of nature in these mega cities than we are in the urban sprawl of America. I see better stewardship of nature here in Hong Kong than I've seen really anywhere else. I think Sweden has a lot to learn from Hong Kong. I'm very proud of how Hong Kongers relate to their own environment. One thing that you will often see in Hong Kong if you go hiking in the beautiful mountains here is that people go out in their spare time and just pick up trash as a recreational activity. They have fostered a sense of of care for their environment that I think is really moving and admirable. And I love the people of Hong Kong very much for caring so much about their environment.
And that's that collective mentality that you're speaking of to some degree, right? So that, and if we talked about earlier, I was talking about the software adoption curve. If I had to pick, forget the name of a city, but if I had to pick a populace that could embrace the kind of technology that you're talking about, I would think I would want one that has this sort of collective mentality, because they're going to be quicker, in theory, to adapt to a world that thinks of each of us contributing for the greater good, the greater advancement. Fair?
I think China is very likely to win the robot and AI race for a couple of geopolitical reasons. They kind of have to. You're familiar with the one-child policy?
Yes.
That China had. That has created a very historically skewed demographic where they have a very aging population now, and China's adversaries will call it a looming demographic collapse. A lot of people are very worried about the demographic collapse in China, but of course, China has seen this coming and they've started making plans. And the plans that they started making were about, well, we're going to have to automate a lot of the labor because we're going to have massive labor shortages. So we're going to really, really heavily invest in automation. And I know that the Western audience is not aware of how far this has gone. So let's drop some stats, right? In 2015, a long time ago now, the Chinese robotic fleet caught up with the American robotic fleet in absolute size. Last year, more than half of all the new robots sold were sold to China. More than half. More than 40% of all industrial robots in the world that are in operation in China right now. 75% of all drone sales is one Chinese company. 75%. The closest American competitor has 4% market share.
4%.
China has already won the race for robotics. They are so far ahead, and the American media is not aware. We see the Optimus robot and the Figure 2 robot and the Boston Dynamics robot, and it's cool, but China's already done it. There are companies like Unitree that make robots that are just as capable that you can buy today for $15,000, a fraction of what their American counterparts cost. Today, I can go have a meal at several restaurants in walking distance from where I am, where the waiter is a robot. Today, right? Today, they have a large fleet of self-driving taxis here in the Greater Bay, not on the Hong Kong side of the border, but in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Today, there are self-driving helicopters and passenger drones in China. Today, we see Western companies get publicity for planning to do things that the Chinese are already doing.
They're already on the field of play.
They've deployed, they're running it commercially. During COVID, people in Shanghai got grocery deliveries by drone to their balcony. Today in Shenzhen, I can order a cup of coffee and get it delivered by drone to me in the park. That's live today, right? It's
mind-blowing.
America is not
Nils.
even close. And I think the reason why this happened is since World War II, no one has ever been ahead of America in anything technologically. This is the first time since World War II that the US finds itself at a technological disadvantage in a narrow but important field, which is robotics.
And talk about the danger, because I know one thing that you mentioned that I gravitated towards, maybe it's the parent in me or the concerned global citizen that has been very fortunate to see different parts of the world. You talked about in one of your speeches, you talked about that this technology, that this should be owned and can be owned by the people, that this, in essence, my interpretation, it doesn't need to bleed into a sci-fi that we've seen a million times over, where one conglomerate, sort of owns everything and dictates planet Earth. That this is something at the individual level can participate in and should, from whatever the ownership is, of the type of world that you're describing. Are we, because we are behind here in the U.S., to your previous point, are we in danger of losing the opportunity to quote unquote sit on the cap table, invest in the world that you're talking about, because we have nation states that are just flying ahead?
I don't think that China is an existential threat to the US at all.
You
I
don't.
think the US is an existential threat to China. I think the US expresses very clearly that they want to limit China's growth and that they're worried about China's growth. And it's a big talking point in American politics how to contain China. Living here and having lived here since 2009, I don't hear people talk about America the same way here, that it's important to contain America and to curtail America. I don't think China is a threat to America. I think China wishes to have a chance to coexist um, and share the planet. Um, there are, of course, things that I have very deep disagreements about with how things are run in China, just as I have very deep disagreements with how things are done in America. I think every government in the world has a lot of growing to do this century to be able to tackle the challenges that we're about to face. But I'm not afraid of China, and I don't think anyone should be afraid of China. I don't think China is out to get you. In fact, there are plenty of Americans you should be afraid of. Just the other day actually, Elon Musk went on Lex Friedman's podcast for a record 8.5 hours. And on that podcast, he was asked by Lex what it will take to win the AI war. And Elon said it will take two things. One is you need the best access to compute, which is why Elon is building this GPU supercluster. The second thing you need is you need the best training data and the most training data. And counterintuitively, humanity has not produced all that much data yet. We don't have enough data to make great AI yet. So we need to start getting more data. And Elon explains that reality scales. In reality, there's endless data. We just need to teach our computers to perceive the world. Spatial computing. Tesla is a spatial computing company. And then he says something that I know scared almost no one, but should scare all of us. He says that Optimus, the robot that he's building, is going to be the greatest source of data. The greatest source of data. Let's unpack that. What is Elon telling us? He's telling us that he is willing to use the data generated by these robots to win the AI war. You're supposed to buy the robot, put one at home. So where's this data being recorded? Literally in your home, right? Facebook has been spying on us for a long time, but Facebook never had the ability to walk into our bedroom, open our bedroom drawer, and see what's in there. But the Optimus robot does. And Elon is telling us that the Optimus robot is going to be the greatest source of data in the world. Capitalism is one of the greatest inventions of humanity so far, but it has some unfortunate downsides. One thing that we haven't learned to tackle as a society yet is how to curb the surveillance capitalistic impulse of Silicon Valley companies to make their money by knowing everything about us. We haven't figured out how to break that cycle in a meaningful way yet. Perhaps the decentralization movement, and the DePIN movement in particular, can serve as an antidote for this, where we build open protocols like the protocol we are building that allows people to host their own data and own their own data and make sure that the data is spread out instead of all going to one agency that literally wants to see everything that we see and know everything that we know, so that they can perfectly market to us or now train the best AI. And if you believe, like Elon does, that it's a question of existential importance to win the AI race, you'd better believe he's going to spy on you in your home with this robot, and he's going to do it for America.
And
And
he's
at
going to,
that point, right, when we have these private companies that will, for national security, spy on us, are we meaningfully different from any of the other countries out there? We have a lot of soul searching to do in the West to see how we are treating our own citizenry and their privacy.
I mean, look, it tackles at a bare minimum our notion of a democracy. If that plays out, I would think that the calculus would be that from the American perspective, we've just been beaten down with what we don't even know what privacy means anymore. It's turned into the US tax code where it's just so, we give away our privacy in one instance, but then we freak out in another. We don't really know where we stand. And if that's the case, then we are vulnerable to allow what you're saying to play out. Um, I mean, that's a cautionary tale, not for tomorrow. That sounds like a cautionary tale for today. Is that fair?
Spatial computing involves a lot of surveillance if you're not careful, because it's
Because you have to
about
get the data,
perceiving
right?
the world.
Yeah,
You have to get the data,
got to
right?
capture it.
As we touched on earlier in this podcast, right? Understanding where you are in the world is a question of perceiving the world and being able to describe it in a mutually intelligible way. So spatial computing is machine perception. It's teaching the machine to look at the world. And a lot of the complexity of looking at the world is just too big to fit inside this one little computer inside the robot. So the way that visual positioning works now at scale, when you want to go out into the world, the map of the world is much too big to fit in a robotic brain, is that you send the images you see to a server in the cloud that compares it to what the world looks like to figure out where you are. The equation is literally, tell me what you're looking at, I will tell you where you are. We believe that if this is an inevitable part of the future of positioning, which it may be, that it's important that it's not one organization that gets to say, hey, tell me what you're looking at, and I'll tell you where you are. We need to choose to decentralize this technology so we can have it in the most privacy preserving way afforded to us. No solution is going to be perfect, but what we think is the best solution is to make this a conversation between the visitor and the venue, because that's the privacy we've already given up. Like when you go to the grocery store, you know that the grocery store has security cameras and you know you're on that security camera. Like it's no mystery to the grocery store that you're there. They know. Google doesn't need to know that you're in the grocery store. Elon Musk does not need to know that you're in the grocery store, right? We need to reduce the privacy violations to the smallest interaction we can. And we think that interaction is between the visitor and the venue.
And that's the
Right? It's
danger of
not
the propaganda, right? Because if it's all about in the US people fearing safety, and we don't have to get into guns and all that, but now you can say, well, we need facial recognition. So the grocery store needs to know that Nils Pihl has walked in or that Rod Berger has walked in, right? There's a safety because I'm scared for my own safety, right? I mean, that seems to be the counter argument that potentially could aid those that have less than, I think, authentic and well-meaning intentions.
Well, I think, the grocery store may have a legitimate concern in knowing who you are, and you can't stop a human being from recognizing another human being anyhow. And the difference is, again, who is privy to this information? I am okay, reluctantly, with the fact that the grocery store knows that I'm in the grocery store, but I don't want Elon to also know that I'm in the grocery store. This is the point, right? We need to reduce the privacy violation to its smallest possible interaction, which I think is between the visitor and the venue. There shouldn't be a third party that also gets to listen in, that also gets to watch, that also gets to know these things. It's not good for the world if there's one profit-driven company that, under its fiduciary obligations, under law, has to do everything it can to maximize revenue at our expense, looking at everything that we look at, knowing everything that we buy, knowing what's in our bedroom
Because
drawers,
they can
etc. That's
monetize
not enough.
every element of our lives. They're triangulating if that happens. They're going to know that your pattern is to go every Monday afternoon to the grocery store, and then they can work off of that. It's just another data point, right? They're mapping that out. Um, okay, so talk about your company and help me understand sort of the decision where you are now when you talk about like Cactus or McKenna, which I know was just released. How do you think about I think this is a fair assumption that you're a visionary, so you have big ideas, which selfishly, I want professionals like you to have big ideas. But it doesn't mean that you start with them right now, or that there are sort of tea leaves in what you're developing now, because those are the building blocks, using sort of vernacular from a physical world, but like the building blocks to whatever that big vision is. Um, Sort of give me the elevator speech on Alki Labs and sort of where a cactus and a McKenna sit in sort of a larger vision and hope that you have in the way in which you can contribute.
Our mission is to increase civilization's intercognitive capacity. That means our ability to think, experience things together with each other, but also with AI, our intercognitive capacity. And the greatest way to extend human range and capability is through facilitating communication and cooperation. One of the things that I really believe. So by improving our ability to work together and communicate with each other, we will build a better village for ourselves. The reason spatial computing is such an important part in this is most of the things that matter to us in the world are in the world, not on the internet. They're in the world. So we want to be able to communicate with each other better here in the world. We want to be able to understand our spaces better here in the world. And we want the assistance of robots and AI to be able to help us here in the world. So spatial computing is the missing piece of this. We have to build this bridge from the digital to the physical so that computers can understand our world. And we are not alone in realizing this, of course. 7 of the 10 biggest companies in the world are spending a very healthy chunk of all the money they have on spatial computing on any given year. Apple is doing a lot of spatial computing. Google is doing a lot of spatial computing. Microsoft is doing a lot of spatial computing. I would argue that Tesla is almost first and foremost a spatial computing company. They're not a car company. They're not a robot company. The greatest asset that they have in the world right now is that they have millions of cameras out in the world collecting real world data, which Elon alluded to already with his cars, but said that Optimus is going to be the greatest source, right? Tesla is a spatial computing company. What Auki is doing differently is that we want this to be built in a decentralized way. We are building something that we're calling a decentralized machine perception network, where the idea is that any device, any agent, should be able to borrow the sensory perceptions and spatial understanding of other participants in the environment. This is what we believe is the prerequisite for solving that Beijing traffic problem. Right? We need the cars to be able to explain the reality around them. You as a single car, have cameras on you, etc., but you can't see around corners. You don't know what you can't see. But a network of connected cars can have very good understanding of what's around. And we can imagine a future, we're trying to build the future where your car can ask a car that's already around the corner, hey, is anyone crossing the street right now? Do I need to slow down? That future is not only possible, but I think almost inevitable if we show up and do the work. I think that a decentralized machine perception network is not only technically superior, because when you allow people to participate on fair terms and let them fund, own, and operate this infrastructure themselves and have a stake in it and preserve their privacy and dignity under capitalism using the system, like using the power of capitalism to serve the individual rather than the corporation. I think this is a technically superior solution. It will connect more sensors than the centralized companies will be able to. It'll see more of the world than the centralized companies will be able to. It will have access to more parts of the world than the companies like Tesla will be able to have access to. And it's morally superior. So I believe in my heart of hearts that it's important for us as a civilization to do this work, to take spatial computing seriously, to take decentralization seriously, because as I said earlier, every time we've found ourselves at the precipice of some new communication technology, we've always stepped through that door. And now we're standing in front of one of these doors again with augmented reality. and built on spatial computing. Now we're standing at the door of humanoid robotics. Now we're standing at this door now. We are going to step through. So who are we going to be when we step through? That's work that we have to show up for today and make conscious decisions today and put our best efforts in today. And that's what motivates me.
As we put a wrap on this pod, take me inside your mind. What are your dreams when you fall asleep at night? What do your dreams look? What's the canvas by which you experience dreaming? Because I know my dreams get impacted when I see different physical spaces that are outside of what I've ever known to be sort of traditional or what I can expect around a corner. When I'm in a refugee camp in Eastern Africa, it's very different from me and it impacts my dreams. I look at trees differently. I look at the way in which the space that I'm inhabiting within a dream. And you're one that speaks about meditation. So I would think that dreaming and being sort of in that state could be very powerful for you. What is dreaming like for someone who is living in your world?
It's often work. I often dream that I am doing work, especially together with my colleagues, having meaningful or difficult conversations with my colleagues or with my family about the work that we either are doing or need to do. I think a lot of emotional processing of the challenges of the work that we do and the sacrifices that we have to make to try to keep up with these big companies. A lot of my dreams take place in familiar spaces. I'm a quite spatial dreamer in that I return to familiar spaces and quite often have lucid dreaming where I can move around these familiar spaces and do work. And if I'm lucky enough to catch on that, like, hey, I'm lucid dreaming right now and I have an opportunity to do some work, I'll squeeze that shift in.
Thanks for taking the plunge into Headroom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. Headroom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is Headroom.